We're here out on the edge of Burial Hill at the close of our 2019 field season, and we've had a very productive year. We've learned a lot about the time period when this was Fort Hill, and also the earlier period when it was the Wampanoag village of Patuxent. We're really investigating those periods, not so much the period of the burial ground. We're in this location because we're inside the original palisaded settlement of the Plymouth colony, and we've been excavating down on the location of one of the early structures that was inside the colony. The building appears to have been built in its earliest phase, backed up into the bank. So literally the two walls of the building cut into the bank and then walls built on the front. We're looking down here into parts of the two buildings we've been working on uncovering this year. And a lot of what we've been doing is trying to expand our excavation in ways that allows us to get dimensions and some of the structure to the buildings. So the long trench stretching out in front of us here is running east-west to try and get the full extent of the building, and along the entire bottom of that trench, we've now come down on daub from decayed walls entirely covering the floor of our excavation unit. So we're inside a building where the walls have collapsed, and we can recognize the layer of the wall collapse.
So they got a similar strat over there right above the daub, and we were wondering whether or not the same thing would happen over here. And that's kind of what it looks like happening. Like, we can really see the daub top of that now.
In the very closest area of our excavation, we're in the process of cutting out a section of the floor to look in fine detail at the layers that comprise the floor. So there's a layer of dirt that overlies the floor, and then a floor level that's filled with small pieces of charcoal and little broken pieces of pottery and other artifacts. And that then in turn sits on a finely packed gravel, and the gravel layer is ultimately on subsoil. So the floor of the building was cut in and dug down into the subsoil before the building was in use. A second part of the building stretches a little further to the right towards the south, and there we're excavating deposits of trash that are in small pits on the floor of the building. In both instances, one of the interesting things is we're finding clusters of artifacts on the floors of these buildings. Pottery, bottle bases, pieces of cutlery, things that were left behind as trash or trod into the floor when the building was in use. That goes on both sides? Sort of. Yeah. It has a glazed grip on the outside.
Yeah, pieces were further separated.
They were all found here.
Further separated, so almost like they just fell there.
And then you also have to put EU something, right?
EU 35.
Right there.
If it is, how can I see the border?
What color was it? So that's the border. Does that after that border?
We'll test it out on profile drawings.
Context. What happened? Just the soil change?
Yeah.
Cool.
So there was a slightly darker layer of soil that went over the middle, and we peeled it back, and it kind of stopped at that yellow band that we're seeing. Yep. And then the dark part persisted on this side.
Over here, Erica. Here's the spade.
What are you finding?
Charcoal.
Cool.
Calcine bone. We're in an organic context.
Guys, in a few hours, I'm going to take off and do some other things. I'll be back.
All right, we'll be here.
One of the projects we've been working on for the last few years is to try and connect the Wampanoag site that extends to the north here to the English settlement and house that we found to the south. And over the last few years, we've been digging a series of north-south trenches to connect these two parts of the site. To the north, there's actually a very distinct layer in all of these site soils that contains a lot of flake stone tools, native pottery, flakes from actually making tools, and that actually extends well down towards the edge of our site. One of the things we recognized this year was that layer seems to be missing in parts of the site further to the south. Our guess at the time was that this was a reflection of kind of the divide between the Wampanoag settlement and the English settlement to the south. And in our excavations this year, it really seems like that break comes in the area where we're now projecting the palisade line for the English settlement. This is really significant because what it means is that the native artifacts, the Wampanoag artifacts we've been finding, are not from the earlier village of Patuxet, but are actually from a Wampanoag settlement on the edge of Burial Hill that's contemporary with the English settlement. So an indication of the time when people were here to trade or interact with the Plymouth colonists.
That's exactly what
Okay, so I should push it. What? Oh no, I'm all set.
Are you finding anything in this layer?
Yeah, we're finding that's some colonial stuff.
Ooh, can I see?
I don't know what's in there, but
Oh, those are nice.
yeah, found something.
That looks great. And then just put the north arrow in. That's a flake. Yes! Well done!
I would move it up a little more. Like move your ruler up. There.
in the middle of the big class.
71. Okay.
Well, yeah, big car.
There's that photography where he'll shoot in all the golf tees.
Oh, good. Oh, no, no. I'll be around. Yeah, so I may take off the one back, actually,
So is that, it's been some of your trenches been there? Actually had stones. And there's actually resolved a couple of
And we also have one in the wall too on this profile. We have some kind of
Does that mean we're going this way?
like another one to add in line.
Does that mean we're going this way?
Yes.
Next year.
Early on in the project at Burial Hill, we performed a series of geophysical surveys to identify targets of interest, that is, attempt to identify features that we might want to excavate. We can't always tell what these anomalies really are by the survey alone, Once the excavators began to find suggestions of a palisade, we began to follow those anomalies and concentrate on the linear features running towards the top of the hill, highlighted in the survey.
So one of our great accomplishments of the 2019 season is that we think we have the first evidence for part of the palisade line that encircled the original settlement. So we've, in this large trench here, uncovered a dark soil stain that runs across the length of the trench. That soil stain had a large pit up against it and was lined on both sides with a series of linear rocks. As we took the pit out, we were able to see part of this soil stain in profile, and you can see the very dark patch in there that is presenting very clearly as the bottom of a post. We've also worked at that feature some here on the west end, and on the west end we've actually gotten the plan of that to resolve up into what looked like a series of post stains. So we're interpreting this right now as the first evidence for the palisade, with a series of posts set in a linear trench and packed in at some point with some rocks on the side, either when it was constructed or perhaps later when someone was trying to do a period of repair. We're in the process of documenting this, this post profile, and then we're going to have our colleague Dennis Piota excavate that as a block to archive the post base.
25 people there for 6 weeks or 2 months or something. They never got any training.
I'm taking a sample of the soil for the purpose of studying it in the lab. This is a large block of soil that shows the post hole. The all-important thing is to get it undisturbed from the field to the lab, and that can be very difficult when you're dealing with sandy soils. That's the case that we have here in Plymouth. The soil is so sandy that if you were to try to lift it, it would fall apart in your hands, as beach sand would fall apart. In this case, I'm using plaster wrap to surround and harden the soil block. In that way, it will not fall apart, and I'll have an undisturbed sample for the lab where I can treat it in many ways. One of the things that I do is to impregnate the sample with the resin, and then I slice it as you would slice, say, a rock. Then we can look at thin sections of my slices under the microscope. We do chemical tests. We even archive it for future researchers to use, should they wish. This is a very large sample. This sample weighs, about 90 pounds, and it's going to be a great resource for the future.
For us to help plan too. Think about 10 grams.
7.5 YR.